Hey everyone. Last time we had a look at AMD's Sempron 145 CPU. That was a single core CPU which also had a disabled second core. I did manage to unlock that second core and it provided some pretty substantial improvements. So if you want to check that video out, I'll link it up there in that corner. But the video I actually wanted to make before I ran into some issues, which I'll go into later on, was just the standard review of comparing the stock and overclocked performance, because it is a pretty big overclocker to say the least. So that's what we're going to do today. The interesting thing about the Sempron 145 is that being based on the Sargas architecture, which I'm not sure if I pronounced right, means that it's essentially a cut down version of the Rigor architecture. I'm also not sure if I pronounced that right, which the Athlon 2s were based on. And the Rigor architecture is itself cut down from the same architecture that the Phenom IIs used. So the Sempron 145 is basically just a single core Phenom 2 with no L3 cache, meaning that in theory it should overclock at least the same, if not better than a Phenom 2, because it does only have a single core to run. It doesn't have to try run 4 or 6 cores like the Phenom 2s did. But yeah, as I said earlier, originally I was going to include the tests you're going to see today in the previous video, but I did run into some problems not related to the CPU. One of the sticks of RAM I used turned out to be faulty. Ended up getting that replaced and it's fine. But yeah, the clocks we actually reached were actually seriously impressive. I'm filming this at least a couple of weeks, if not 3 or so weeks after I did the actual test, so I can't remember a clock off the top of my head. But as a single core CPU, the Sempron 145 managed something like 4.4 gigahertz at safe voltage levels, which is insane. With 2 cores though, I did need to drop it down a little, I think to around 4.2 or 4.3. I'll put the exact figure up somewhere here with the voltage I used when I'm actually doing the editing. But yeah, seriously impressive overclock. Absolutely huge. And that comes with some pretty substantial improvements. The biggest of which were in beamng.drive. Average FPS literally tripled up to 67.4 compared to only 22.1 in the pre-overclock tests. 1% and 0.1% low frame rates still suffer at 23.9 and 13.9 FPS respectively, and hadn't improved as much over the 12.4 and 8 FPS, 1% and 0.1% lows the Sempron 145 achieved at stock clocks. You can see this at points where FPS will dip down into the mid-40s at times, and on occasion into the 20s with noticeable stuttering. I think the heavy stuttering occurs when the game is trying to load in textures, which is a particular problem for games like beamng, where due to its open world nature, the CPU really needs to be fast enough to stream the textures in on time, or you get those kinds of issues. For the most part though, performance was quite playable. Outside of whenever the game stuttered or hitched, frame rates were normally in the 60 to 70 FPS range, and on the Utah map we'd even hit up to 90. I have to say, I wasn't expecting the jump in performance to be as massive as it was. It's insane getting this sort of performance from a 12-year-old processor that was sold as a single core CPU. So it's currently bonfire night here in the UK as I'm recording this, so you might be able to hear fireworks going off outside, although NVIDIA broadcast might be cutting that noise out. But yeah, Crysis saw a pretty major improvement too, just not anywhere near as much as beamng.drive did, which I'm still amazed at. Average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates had gone up from 74.7, 34.2 and 13.1 FPS respectively, to 107.6, 49.6 and 19.3 FPS. Unlocking the second core boosted performance massively on its own anyway though, so I suppose it's not that surprising that the OC didn't have as big of an effect as it did in beamng. General gameplay wasn't much different, given that even without the OC, FPS was often well over 60 as it was, so the improvements then came in the most intense scenes where there was a lot going on screen at once. You see this if you blow up the fuel station near the school, for example. Pre-overclock, you'd see performance getting noticeably stuttery, with FPS dipping quite hard. So while the differences aren't obvious for the most part, it's key moments like that that really show how big a difference the overclock has made. There were still moments where you could see minor stuttering and hitches, so it's not perfect, but overall it's seriously impressive what the overclock has done here. CSGO saw a pretty big improvement too, with averages of 66.3 FPS compared to only 39.3 previously. Again, not as big as beamng, but a huge improvement nonetheless. Pre-overclock, the Mirage map still had issues at times of stuttering, mostly in that opening bit of close combat in the first round. The overclock though completely fixes that. It does still dip to under 60 FPS at that point, but the noticeable stuttering at that point is gone now. Mirage overall runs quite smoothly now, and that's true for the Dust 2 map as well. That does still have some very slight micro stuttering and hitches occasionally, but it is massively improved compared to without the OC, where we'd even see dips into the 20s on Dust 2 at times. Harder to run maps like Anubis, for example, still stutter pretty noticeably at times, but FPS has improved massively and is generally in the 40 to 60 FPS range, but mostly in the mid 40s though. Overall, the overclock did make a pretty big improvement to average frame rates, with 66.3 FPS compared to 39.3 previously. 1% lows had improved to 27.7, up from 16.5, and we didn't see that much of a difference in 0.1% lows, with only a 4 FPS improvement here, to 10.1 versus 6.1 without the OC. But outside of those harder to run maps, performance is actually relatively smooth now. I do have to say though, just for full transparency, and I mentioned this last time as well, but unlocking the second core seemed to cause a bug where occasionally the second core would get stuck around 800-ish MHz, and that might have been why there wasn't really an improvement just by unlocking the second core. So given I'm using the benchmark figures from that video, the difference here might actually be far more than what it actually should be. And finishing off with Skyrim, there wasn't really much of an improvement to make, to be honest. There's a 60 FPS cap in game, so average frame rates hadn't improved at all, and we're within margin of error at 59.1 FPS, compared to 59.8 previously. Unlocking the second core on its own already massively improved performance, so there wasn't really any room to improve further. That said though, we do still see noticeable improvements in terms of the frequency of stuttering and hitches. Those pushed the 1% low up noticeably to 45.3 FPS, compared to 33.2 without the OC. 0.1% lows saw a small improvement from 9.1 to 15.8 FPS as well, although that's not that noticeable compared to the improvement in 1% lows. On the run through the woods near the start of the game towards Riverwood, before we saw minor hitches, but there aren't as many now, and that's basically the same kind of story throughout the rest of the game. Wherever there was any stuttering or hitching, the OC has just improved on that and reduced how often it happens. If you haven't seen the last video, I had to use the ultra low graphics tool for Skyrim, which you can get from Nexus Mods, to get playable performance, but you could probably get away with not using that now. The 60 FPS cap here, and that's a hard cap in game, although I think it changes depending on the refresh rate of your monitor though. But that aside, the 60 FPS cap is holding the CPU back, so the OC would end up helping out even more if you up the settings. So, to conclude, the Sempron 145 is an absolute monster when it comes to overclocking. The boosts in performance are huge across the board. Over 50% improvement in average FPS in most of the games, and when it comes to beamng.drive, the performance, it literally tripled in terms of average FPS. The overclock managed to do over the 2-core version of the 145 at stock clocks. And although I didn't include it in this video, 7-zip and Cinebench also saw huge improvements as well, with 48% improvements in 7-zip over the stock 2-core benchmarks, and a 50% improvement in score in Cinebench over the stock 2-core benchmark. Now, the overclock did come with a pretty big jump in power draw. Now we're talking almost 60 watts of power draw now, which is over 110% more power than what stock clocks with just 1-core build, which might seem like a pretty substantial amount, but we are seeing performance doubled, if not tripled in some cases. So the CPU is still performing actually pretty efficiently, all things considered. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. So I'd like to thank Patreon supporters Shadow in the Void and Matt Sterak, including all the other patrons you're seeing here right about now. If you'd also like to support me in creating these videos, you can do so at the links down below. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe to my channel as well if you'd like to see more content like this. But yeah, that's going to be it for now, so hopefully I'll see you in the next one.